Thank you to all of you who are joining us from across the country for this important conversation we are having this afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the Urban Institute, albeit virtually, and to this roundtable discussion on using data to advance racial equity in local communities. I am Tanae Traylor, Vice President of the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy here at Urban. First, a few housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded and the recording will be posted online afterwards. Our speaker bios are available online. You can hide captions or adjust settings with the live transcript button. And all participants are muted, but you can type your questions or comments in the Q&A box at any time. Please take 1 to 2 minutes to complete the survey at the end of this event. We welcome and we appreciate your feedback. Lastly, for us social media folks, engage with us online using #live@urban. Again, welcome. Today's event is a part of our American Transformation Project under the direction of Faith Mitchell, our Institute Fellow in our Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy and Health Policy Center. The American Transformation Project, or ATP, is a research program of the Urban Institute designed to advance racial equity and dismantle structural racism, with a focus on Black, Latinx, Native American, and Asian young people in the United States. ATP leverages the Urban Institute's research capacities to inform funder practices in 4 key areas: education, employment, justice, and healthy development. By combining substantive research knowledge with the expertise of leaders in practice, advising and strategy, we aim to convene a lively community of engaged, forward-looking partners who envision an equal future for America's young people. Urban is excited about this program and excited to be convening you all here today. We believe that Generation Z will help lead the nation toward a future where a person's race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status does not determine one's life outcome. We are excited to help build with them for a healthy future. I also want to take an opportunity to share a bit about the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy. For more than 20 years, the Center has been a critical resource for credible, nonpartisan, and accessible data and insights on the nonprofit and philanthropic activity in our society. And while we hope to continue to be a trusted source, we also know the field is evolving and growing. The number of registered nonprofits increased each year, and philanthropic giving is also increasing this year. But to what end? CNP is looking at big picture issues, exploring questions like what are the supports and services that the social sector needs to thrive, and how well does this infrastructure ecosystem accomplish this goal? Earlier this year, we brought on a new director of the National Center on Charitable Statistics to renew this important data resource for the field. And just a few months ago, we launched an online giving dashboard that collects and organizes data to provide a snapshot of the many ways Americans give. And we are exploring ways to deepen our presence and impact in place. We're starting with the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors in the American South, which is near and dear to my heart. In addition, we're fostering sector enrichment. We provide organizational and sector-wide advising and guidance to identify and support social sector innovation and impact, similar to the convening we are hosting today. Today's conversation is much more than numbers and data points. It's about how the social sector positively activates data to change the lives of people of color in our community. That's transformation. An adage my grandmother and my mother always shared with me is, when you know better, you do better. So today we are here to know better, so we can all do better. Before we begin, the panel discussion, we're going to hear from two leaders of community-based organizations to learn more about innovative data strategies that successfully build agency, create opportunity, and advance racial equity in communities of color. We'll begin with Nathaniel Smith, the founder and chief equity officer of the Partnership for Southern Equity, and Leicester Johnson, CEO of the Academy of Hope. But first, let me share a bit about Nathaniel and the Partnership for Southern Equity. PSE advances policies and institutional actions that promote racial equity and shared prosperity for all in the growth of metropolitan Atlanta and the American South. Under Nathaniel's leadership, PSE created the South's first equity mapping tool, the Metro Atlanta Equity Atlas, now the Metro Atlanta Racial Equity Atlas. And he's led a coalition of diverse stakeholders to support a $13 million transit referendum that expanded public transit in a new county for the first time in 45 years. PSE's leadership is instrumental in partnering with several organizations to create the Justice 40 Accelerator. Justice 40 Accelerator is designed to provide organizations with innovative frontline community climate projects the assistance to better position them to pursue and win federal funding, and to hold accountable the Biden-Harris administration's executive order to direct 40% of the federal climate action funds to disadvantaged communities. I can list all of his great accomplishments, but I'll direct you to his bio. I will say he's a great dad to a graduating senior, and he's also a true AT alien. Now, it is my honor and privilege to introduce you to my friend, Nathaniel Smith, again, founder and chief equity officer for the Partnership for Southern Equity. Thank you, Nathaniel.
Oh, no, thank you, Tanae. And I think you being my friend is one of my greatest accomplishments. And I just want to say congratulations on your new role. You know, although we miss you being active and engaged in making Atlanta better, we're really excited about the position that you're holding now. And more important, your role now, your bigger role in ensuring that the South, the American South, has an opportunity to engage in critical decision-making and also be funded in the way that we need to in order to move our nation forward. I also wanted to take the time to thank Faith as well for doing such an awesome job in pulling this conversation together. And for me, this is truly an honor to have an opportunity to participate in this conversation. So let me get started. As Tanae articulated earlier, the Partnership for Southern Equity works to advance a new Southern agenda for racial equity and shared prosperity in the American South and in the nation. There are many projects that we're engaged in that are national in scope. We understand that in order to advance racial equity, we have to include and engage data in ways that will work to disrupt the systems of inequity, and in particular, white oppression and how it relates to our economy, policymaking, society, and culture. Why do we think data is so important? Is that we see data as not just a way to count pennies or to count, you know, or provide best practice opportunities. We actually see data and the accumulation of data as power. We see data as an organizing strategy that can work to not only bring people together, but position communities that have been marginalized in ways to hold people in power accountable in ways, unfortunately, that they have not been able to hold people accountable. So first and foremost, we look at data as organized power, as an opportunity to really cultivate the agency for frontline leaders and their allies to build the type of political and policy wherewithal to advance racial equity locally, regionally, and nationally. Two, we also understand that data alone is not the only thing that is needed, both quantitative and qualitative data, that it is also a tool to advance what we call a values revolution. Without data being connected to a movement, of people with shared values, then the reports just end up on the shelf collecting dust. And so we see it not as the end, but as a key tool that can be utilized to advance a movement for racial equity. Three, we also understand, unfortunately, that the baselines that are used on many occasions to assess the conditions of communities of color and communities who have been disinvested in and marginalized is always put in a position of a push and pull between people who are in positions of power that are trying to create narratives that are inconsistent with what is happening on the ground, and the people who have been marginalized who experience injustice every day. So data allows us to win what we call the battle of the baseline, the battle that is always required to ensure that when we are departing and having and working to have a clear understanding about where we have to begin in order to create innovative policies, that baseline is grounded in truth, in equity, and informed by the people who, in my opinion, on the ground, while they are closest to the problems that we face and that they face, are actually closest to the solution. And last, but certainly not least, I mean, how many of us on this Zoom call know, and I'm sure everybody does, that there are a lot of policies that are made, unfortunately, based off of bad values and bad data, old data. We want to make sure that we can constantly provide the data that is required to inform policymaking in ways that will ensure that the decisions that are made as it relates to public policy are creating the environments and outcomes that will create a more equitable and inclusive American South and nation. So for the Partnership for Southern Equity, there are many ways that we have worked to advance this with our various research partners. We also have our own research shop called Data Research Innovation and Policy, our DRIP department, that works constantly to use data to influence the narrative and elevate the consciousness of decision makers and frontline leaders in order to hold the people in power accountable. And Tanae alluded to some of those efforts, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper. In relation to this fight over the battle of the baseline, the Partnership for Southern Equity understood that the data fight, the work that needed to be done to ensure that people had a clear understanding of how structural racism was affecting communities, was being lost by frontline organizations and leaders that were working to advance equity in Metro Atlanta. And as a result of that, we used this need, this urgency to organize various partners and foundations with us to develop and design and implement the Metro Atlanta Racial Equity Atlas, which is a geospatial research tool, but it's also utilizing qualitative data, a storytelling tool that actually elevates inequities that we're facing in Metro Atlanta, while also providing opportunities for the people that are hurt the most to tell the stories and really testify their experiences as it relates to how structural racism continues to impact their communities. We call that tool Maria, the Metro Atlanta Racial Equity Atlas. And that tool now is being used not only by researchers, but also utilized by community leaders to work to advance their own local policies. It has also been used, again, as I said before, as an opportunity to bring several research institutions in our region, in our state, who are working to advance racial equity together. And our hope is that we will have an opportunity through the success of Maria to not only provide a centralized depository of information for individuals to use to advance racial equity, but also an opportunity for a village to be cultivated of researchers that can work together now to begin to collectively influence the narrative and elevate good data and information and stories about the challenges that we face in Metro Atlanta around racial equity. The second area that we're really excited about in how we've been utilizing data is the work around the Justice 40 Accelerator. And Tanae has talked a little bit about how we are working with many organizations around the country to provide funding and technical assistance and navigational support in order for them to be successful in applying for Justice 40 $40. Why is that important? Because the history of contracting and procurement both locally and federally, is tainted with a history of structural racism. And in many ways, our federal government and local governments have unfortunately utilized public dollars as a way to harm communities and not heal communities. And so with the work of the accelerator, we're working to realize a healing and repair agenda around public investments, ways that we'll have a chance to repair the history of structural inequity through this incredible opportunity, which is the Justice for the Accelerator. One of the aspects of the accelerator that we're really excited about is that we've actually developed a story mapping tool that not only articulates the history of contracting and procurement, and in particular racism in the contracting and procurement process, both locally and nationally, but we also developed the story map that actually articulates the challenges that organizations led by people of color face every day to access the resources of the federal government and local government. So while we are lifting up the quantitative aspects of the barriers that we're facing, we're working hard to put a face on that so people can fully understand the challenges that communities are facing. We also provided a clear graphic of where the Justice $40 are available, and are working again to ensure that communities understand that these dollars are available, but even more so, understanding that putting good money in bad systems will not realize good results. Work to create an alternative delivery system that is informed by the data and the stories that could work in unity with our government to ensure that the dollars that are being expended will get to the people that need it the most. And so we're extremely excited about the accelerator and are looking forward to continue to fund organizations around the country and use data as a way to advance towards a more inclusive and racially just procurement delivery system, both locally and nationally. And last, but certainly not least, we also understand the role that public finance locally has played on accelerating gentrification, and that in many places, economic development agencies have been used as piggy banks for for-profit real estate development. And on many occasions, our most vulnerable, in particular communities of color, have been positioned to subsidize their own displacement. We are working right now to develop a tool called the Equitable Development Implementation Tool, which will be a decision support tool that will not only educate good developers and good development, whether it be the advocates for that in government or real developers, but also create the conditions for communities to be proactive in understanding how development occurs and begin the process again of influencing and disrupting the inequitable delivery systems of finance and development that continue to exacerbate the market pressures and stresses that communities of color face when development occurs, in particular in hot market communities. So again, we look at data as central to advancing and elevating a movement for racial justice, but we also do not see it as the end. We do not see it as, if we can develop all the data, then everything will change. We see it as a component of a bigger agenda, an agenda that requires us to reach further than we've ever gone before, an agenda that requires us to shake the very fabric of our institutions and systems and replace the current values that continue to necessitate injustice and racial inequity and structural racism. We have to disrupt that and replace it with delivery systems and an economy and an environmental agenda that is centered in justice, healing, and repair. And so I will stop there. But again, Tanae, thank you for giving me an opportunity to share. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions folks that are participating on this call may have once the presentations are completed. Thank you so much.
Oh gosh, thank you, Nathaniel. You never disappoint. Few nuggets I took away: the values revolution, data as an organizing tool, the battle of the baseline, all fantastic points and nuggets for us to hold on to. I'm going to pivot and introduce Leicester Johnson. And after Leicester, we'll hear from our panel who will go deeper into their work, and we'll be joined by another colleague at Urban, and Faith will lead us through that. But before I hand it over to LaSester, allow me to introduce her. LaSester Johnson is a visionary leader and social change champion who has more than 25 years of experience in nonprofit management, education, and advocacy. For many years, she has been at the forefront of advancing equitable and inclusive solutions for communities that have historically been underserved. In 2006, LaSester was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Academy of Hope. Academy of Hope is an adult education provider in Washington, D.C. Under her stewardship, AOH expanded its footprint to a second campus, transitioned to become an adult public charter school, which I thought was so cool, and expanded its workforce programming to include a healthcare and an IT academy. She's tripled its staff and increased its annual revenue from $650,000 to, listen to this, to over $9 million annually. This is no small feat. We are so happy that LaSester is joining us today. So welcome, and we are looking forward to your remarks.
Hey, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here and to join this conversation. I will first start by sharing a video. We believe at Academy of Hope that the stories of our learners are best told by our learners themselves. So I have a 4-minute video that will give you an introduction to our work through the voices of Angel and Todd, and then I'll share more about our work at Academy of Hope. The District of Columbia, I really like to say it's a tale of two cities. We have some of the most educated individuals, wealthy individuals in the country living here, but we also have a significant number of individuals who are really struggling with the basic skills.
I left school in my 10th grade year, and I was pregnant with my first child. And I just never went back.
A lot of us dropped out of school because we felt nobody cared. You know, we were just numbers that nobody would miss.
Academy of Hope is an adult public charter school in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to provide high-quality adult education and services in a manner that improves our community.
Our students have been through so much, and many have conquered in spite of everything.
Many of our students at Academy of Hope feel ashamed to come back to school because they feel like they've messed up somewhere along the way.
At first, I'll be honest with you, I was scared to death. Sitting in the classroom, sitting at a desk, or just sitting around a group, knowing as old as you are and the things that you don't know.
What I tell them is that you can't worry about what you should have done. All you can worry about is where you are today. And the fact that you're here speaks volumes about you as a person.
We'll meet them wherever they are and then make plans to move them along at the rate of learning that they need.
Academy of Hope is lucky that they have phenomenal management. It's a very well-run organization. Not all those in the Washington, D.C. area are as lucky to have a school like Academy of Hope.
Community is a core value of Academy of Hope. And in order to get a person to really persist through a program, we want to create a sense of belonging.
It's more like an extended family. We all say it takes a village to raise a child, but sometimes that village needs the help of an adult.
We formed a beautiful support group within the adults, and nobody was leaving nobody behind.
One of the things we're doing is partnering with private sector companies to get our students into the workforce even as they're completing their degree.
career pathway really dove into who I was and why I was, to help me understand what I want to become and why I want to become.
Adult education is not just educating the adult. When the adults learn, it impacts the children, it impacts the community, it impacts their job site.
I didn't realize the need. I had no idea. It was that many people in my city that really wanted to get better themselves. I thought that was awesome.
I don't want to be on food stamps. I don't want to be in the system. I want to work.
Once our students graduate from Academy of Hope, it doesn't mean that they won't still face challenges. But if you were able to get your high school diploma, that there is nothing out in this world that you can't accomplish.
I know when I walked through those doors, I got support from everybody. And that's why I kept a smile on my face.
From day one up until my graduation, they were giving me this key to unlock that door from the dark place that I was in. And when I graduated was when I turned that key and it opened the door.
It's in the name, honey. It's in the name. Hope.
Hey, thank you. So Angel and Todd really speak to the learners that we serve here at Academy of Hope, those who are walking through our doors to access our services. We can't talk about Academy of Hope and adult education if we are not acknowledging some real truths. And that truth is that we are just a Band-Aid to a larger system of inequities in our country. And if you could share slide 1, that would be great. We really are a response to a larger, more systemic issue in our country and in our city that disproportionately impacts individuals of color, BIPOC community, persons with disabilities, women, and even our LGBTQ communities. We are doing our best work to try and fix those gaps, but we as a school realized that we needed to do a lot more. We could not just focus on the individuals and smaller impact on the community, but we really needed to take a much broader lens of our work and how we fit into the greater system of racial inequities in our community. We use data to tell us how we're doing with individuals. We use data to tell us how we're doing as an institution, but we were not using data in a way that helped us to look at the system, the larger structural systems in our community that needed work. We do some advocacy, but we as a school community really wanted to do more. If you could go to slide 2. So we embarked upon our own work to look at race, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the school community. And really that the impetus for that work, if it were not just the adult learners that we're serving, but really on July 6, 2016, Philando Castile, the murder of Philando Castile really happened about a week before our annual all staff end service. And when we came together a week later to really start talking about our work and setting plans, we as a school community said there's much more that we need to do. Educating, helping adults to get their high school credential and to go to work, big stuff. And we really need to do that, but what more can we do? It took us 2 years to find someone or a way to do this work because we didn't want to have a one-off training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then we go about our way. And it was in 2018 that we really started our journey earnestly. We were connected. Actually, we had hired our chief development officer, Joy Bentley Phillips, and one of her first tasks was she was sort of voluntold that we need to get this work off the ground. And we were connected to Equity in the Center to start the work as a school and really using a race and equity lens to do our work. That work started in 2018, and we decided as a school community that we really wanted to focus inward. We were founded by white people. I'm the first Black CEO of Academy of Hope. And there were lots of systems internally. We were doing great work, but we really needed to do some internal work and look at how could we shift our focus from sort of this white dominant lens and really getting grounded in a ready lens to do our work. And that meant that we needed to start with ourselves. So I've got a long list of things that we started. I mean, it has been a 4-year journey. It has been a really tough journey for us. We came together as a community to do community learning, but we've used data to survey staff to understand where are we on sort of this continuum around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we moved from that first survey and built action plans to say, here are the things that we need to do internally to fix ourselves first before we go out and try and fix the system. We've since learned, you know, as you're on this journey, that you can do both at the same time, that we've got our work here, but we can't stop the work that's happening external to Academy of Hope. We began action planning, and we were starting to implement our action plan, and COVID came. And we resurveyed our staff in 2021, and not only did we not make progress, but we actually were very worse off than we were when we started the survey. So that's some of our work internally. I want to go over to just how are we using data from a school level. And if you could go to the next slide. So we center community voices. So we're doing our internal work using data there, but the way that we're using data with our learners is that we spend a lot of time listening to learners through our community town halls. And the community town halls have really helped us to understand what it is we need to do to help our learners. Some of our career academies, our healthcare career academy, our pathways were all the result of our learner town halls. Even the structure of our program post-COVID has come as a result of our learner town halls. We are a hybrid school program now, and that is something that we're continuing into the future. We have representation of learners on our board. We also embarked upon a profile of a graduate and learned that the profile of our graduate did not match the profile of learners, the bulk of learners that we serve. So data has been a big part of our work as we sharpen our programs, if we sharpen our lens on what we need to do, but also as we start to really look at the more systemic issues that we need to address. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Nathaniel and Leicester, both for your excellent presentations. You know, and I was thinking to myself, you both illustrated the power of data for organizing and values, whether it's internally in an organization, as Leicester was describing, externally, you know, in the community or communities, as Nathaniel described, at advancing racial equity using data in a multitude of settings. Hi, everybody. I'm Faith Mitchell. I'm an Institute Fellow at the Urban Institute. I'm the person behind the American Transformation Project, which is the sponsor of this event. And I'm your moderator for the panel discussion that's coming next. So Nathaniel and Leicester are part of the panel discussion. I want to introduce Kathy Pettit, who's going to join the conversation. Kathy is a principal research associate in the Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center at Urban Institute, where her research focuses on community change and how communities use data for more effective and equitable decision-making. Kathy directs the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, which is a learning network of 30 local organizations that ensure that their communities have access to data and skills to use information to advance equity and well-being across neighborhoods. So I'm going to be asking our panelists some questions, and they're all in the sort of anyone can answer or not answer as they choose variety. And I wanted to start, Nathaniel, you mentioned good data and the battle of the baseline. I wanted to start by digging in a little bit more about different kinds of data that the three of you have worked with, and which types have you found to be useful and why, whether it's for internal or external kinds of action. And I guess you can just sort of speak up. Nathaniel has his mic off, so why don't you start first, and then Leicester and Kathy, you can chime in.
Well, I mean, all data we can get our hands on is good data. I think the challenges that we're facing is that because other interests know that the battle of the baseline is real, there are certain segments of data that aren't as readily accessible as they were in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Certain questions that were asked in the past are not being asked anymore, or certain questions are being asked to intimidate people from not answering those questions. So any data at this particular point is good data. I will say though that the data that has helped us the most in our work is definitely quantitative data, but qualitative data. Really going where the challenges are and hearing the stories and the experiences of people, and how the barriers and reinforcing loops of inequity continue to perpetuate harm and damage, not only to communities, but to families, to children, to mothers, to fathers, to grandparents. I think, being able to put a face on the issue has been the most helpful to us, because a lot of times, the people that are hurting the most end up being, bar graphs or pie charts or regression charts. And these are people, these are people that are trying to make it every day. And so it's difficult to tell that story without qualitative data. And so for us, qualitative data, married, of course, with quantitative data that it is informing their storytelling has been the most impactful for us.
Thanks.
Yeah, I will echo what Nathaniel says. Our top data really is the qualitative data when we do our learner town halls. And even the data that we get through our intake process really helps us to paint a picture of what the experience of our learners is, and what they've come through, and what we need, the kinds of services that we need to bring on board to help support learners along their journey. But hearing directly from our learners and the learner community is the most powerful data. We use quantitative data to measure our impact, but hearing from our learners also tells us more about our impact and how what their experiences were in our school community. I will say in particular, as we're starting out sort of looking at the landscape, we will use, we've used a PAC skills map, which tells us literacy levels from a county or city level. We also use census tract data, the American Community Survey, but also going down to specific census tracts to really tell us what's happening, at least from a quantitative perspective, what's happening in the community. But then we get that validated through our learners.
Yeah, I'll put in a second plug for neighborhood level data. I think county level data masks so much of the inequities that we're talking about. So paying attention, calling on all local governments who happen to be listening about sharing, promoting their open data systems, sharing confidential data in responsible ways is really important. And it's also how we get more timely data in addition to the more finely grained geographic data. But I love, I don't know if any data is good data, Nathaniel, we'll have to think about that, but any data that's documented well is good data. I think data about what's missing, who's missing from that data, how it was collected and why really is the best data to help us know how to use it well and use it for the right questions.
Thank you, everybody. How about, are there barriers that you have run into in terms of putting data to use for community benefit? Like, so obstacles you might have run into.
I can give a start. I think we really recognize, as a person who sees all the good data can do, but we recognize that people in many past and current efforts have collected and applied data that are ways that are extractive or even harmful, and people have long memories, so they really need to change their minds by having experiences like Nathaniel and Leicester talk about data helping to give them power and improving their lives. But you can't go in expecting people to have a welcoming attitude if you bring in those bar charts and graphs that they're talking about. But I think the other barrier that we see is, even with so much data available today, the American Community Survey, all the federal data, all the local data, anything from Google, it's still really hard for a community group to figure out how to find the data that they want to answer their question that's relevant. So that's why my network, the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, spends a lot of time making sure people have access to help in finding and using data, or good tools like the Metro Equity one. And this component's missing in a lot of places, of just helping people navigate that sea of information.
I think for me, and I appreciate what you were saying about ensuring that folks are supported, because there isn't such thing as trying to, drink out of a fire hose. I think a lot of times, you have a lot of data and it all becomes the same if you're not assisted in really trying to interpret it. I mean, from our perspective, data is like a scalpel. It can either be good or bad. And it all depends on whose hand or who is using it. And what story is being told. And I'm saying that to back into some of the challenges that we face really around evaluation, and how indicators and how certain perceptions and values influence the way that impact is interpreted and success is evaluated. How do you define a cost? How do you define a benefit? How do you define effectiveness? All of these things, unfortunately, are again influenced by the lenses of the people that are developing the evaluation tools. And unfortunately, what we've learned is, just like almost every other aspect of American life, that has been influenced by structural racism as well. And so the evaluation challenges and the data that is accumulated from those perceptions has been a major challenge for us.
Mm-hmm. And then I will also share that I think putting data to use, really, how do we, as an individual who's a recipient of the data, how does this impact my day-to-day life? How does it help me change my life? And if we can't make that abundantly clear, you can present all of the data charts and pie charts you want. It really needs to be interpreted in a way that people understand how this impacts my life on a day-to-day basis, and how can I use this to even improve my community situation, my individual situation, and not just, just data for data's sake. It has to be beneficial, and folks need to know how to apply it to their lives.
Leicester, your comment leads right into my next question, which has to do with establishing trust. And again, hearing your experience, all three of you, your experiences establishing trust when it comes to asking for and using community data. And that could include what works when trust is present, and then what doesn't work when you don't have trust.
Well, I'm happy to start because we collect a lot of data. So this from a school, from an intake perspective, part of the reason that we're taking in that data is because we want to know what our impact is with the work that we're doing. We also want to know what is the profile of the learner that we are working with, and are we being more successful with one group than we are with another group? So we need that information to help us sort of fine tune the work that we're doing. Without trust, and you know, Academy of Hope is lucky enough that we've got locally, really our brand is respected. People trust us. We've been around long enough that folks do trust that we're going to use that data in a way that's not going to be harmful or disparaging. But it can be a challenge. It's a challenge because there's a distrust just across systems anyway. As we all know, you know, information collected on individuals, particularly BIPOC communities, have been used to harm those communities. So when we're asking people for income data, if we're asking people for information around you know, the benefits that they're receiving, there is a huge risk in sharing that information. And really knowing that, one, we're using this information to help us fine tune our work, but we're going to do something and you're going to see a real benefit from it. If we're not working well with one group of people, we want to demonstrate to you, we're going to show you how we've improved in those areas. So that's how we've built trust over time. But new people who are coming into the community, it takes time to do that.
And I think from my perspective, you know, when we boil down racial equity and what really equity is about, it's about power. You know, it's about, you know, working to ensure that the agency of communities that have been marginalized is strengthened in ways that will allow them to realize their own destiny and a more positive destiny for themselves and for communities. And so the other thing that we have to acknowledge is that data is organized power. Right? Data is power, the same way that organized people are, and the same way that organized money is. Data is organized power. And so the more that we have been able to democratize data and create opportunities for people to have access to data for free, and also create tools whereby they can go, like the Metro Atlanta Racial Equity Atlas, or the work that we've done around the accelerator and other things that we've done, to share that power with them in ways that will allow them to speak truth to power. You know, again, looking at data as an organizing tool, you know, it has given us an opportunity to cultivate trust in the community. Now, for the folks that are used to hoarding data and using it for their own personal reasons, they're not too happy about that. But at the end of the day, though, I mean, if we are talking about equity, we have to talk about power. And if we're talking about power, we have to understand the power that is embedded in organized data and the role that we must play in democratizing that.
I think people are really eager to figure out how that happens in an operational way too. And I think both of you have described how to sort of involve communities early on about why you're collecting the data and what it's for and what you want to use it for across all the stages. We just published a guide to data chats, which is based on our work at the Milwaukee NNIP partner Data You Can Use, which is a model they use, which just resonated. They use to focus on data that is relevant to the people's lives that they're working with, and have value that lived experience in the interpretation, and then think about what the action steps are. And in their cases, the action steps were, you know, seeing health disparities that would allow them to get a COVID testing site in their neighborhood once they had those numbers to bring to the city, or fighting to get a bus stop restored, showing that folks didn't have cars. So it doesn't have to be complicated regressions or fancy analysis, just having sort of the compelling fact to sort of push the policymakers or whoever is holding the resources to convince them along the way.
Great, thanks everybody. And this is actually our closing question, so we have about 10 more minutes. All of you have worked extensively with funders and other organizations that want to use data to advance equity. I'm sure, like funders who are funding you to do that work, or partnering organizations that share your goals. I'm really curious about your advice, especially for the foundation community or corporate funders even, but your advice for organizations that want to get involved in this work, like how to, what some lessons learned and how to approach it.
Sure, I can kick this one off. We think a lot about community-wide data capacity to use beyond the skills of individual people or one organization or one sector. And both, I think Nathaniel is a great demonstration, both local and national philanthropy are in perfect positions, knowing their community, having the convening power and reputation to play a role to build the capacity of a place to use data for racial equity in new ways. So this might mean funding and supporting their own grantees and neighborhood groups and collaborative partnerships around using the data, like the Justice 40 tool, but also just being like the webinar today, a champion for using data around equity to contribute to a culture of learning. And just that we know that these types of investments pay off. When COVID hit, our partners were able to quickly respond to urgent data requests and inform government and community responses to get to the people who need the help the most, because the foundations of data and relationships were in place. So it enables the community to mobilize faster, especially when they're hit by shocks.
Mm-hmm. I would say, yes, continued investment in capacity of organizations that are doing the work on the ground. A lot of times, as a direct service provider, the resources are really for providing the direct service to individuals with whom you're working, which is critically important. But the capacity funds or the ability to mine the data that's out there so that you can teachers and other staff, we're all doing that work. We actually have because of a capacity building grant, we were able to build a performance evaluation and research team, and we're able to build a custom data management system, which we know is a luxury. And we built that during COVID. And so if it were not for that capacity building grant or capacity building resources around data, we would not be able to do that. We would still be operating on spreadsheets. We still have a long way to go, but spreadsheets was not the way for us to go if we wanted to do some more sophisticated analysis. And we're able to even import other things into that system to have a much more robust and rich picture of our impact, or even some of the external things impacting the work that we're doing. But really investing in capacity, and particularly folks who are on the ground organizing and doing the direct service, that capacity to do the data piece and analysis.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think both of those are really great, and I don't want to, regurgitate what they've said. I mean, I think one of the things that they have to do, in my opinion, both local and national philanthropy, is to actually start inward. And what I mean by that is to acknowledge and work hard to understand how the missionary culture of philanthropy, how privilege and whiteness have influenced their decision-making around how the data is interpreted and how success measures are actually designed. That is really, really important, because in many ways that helps them decide who is funded at what level and for how long. And unfortunately, many times Black-led organizations or organizations led by historically disinvested communities of color are at the tail end in terms of size, or even being allowed to be provided room for innovation, as it relates to the work that needs to be done on the ground. So there's some internal work that needs to be done to disrupt that culture and that privilege and that history. And then, going back to what was said, I mean, it's great to provide data, but what are you doing to ensure that that data is informed by real people, and even more so that you're doing all you can to create mechanisms that will facilitate a delivery system of sharing that data in ways that are not only equitable, but also it will ensure that people can actually use it in a way that will help to create a culture of accountability in the communities that they live in.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to segue now to questions from our audience. And thanks to everybody who submitted a question. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them. I have a feeling we won't, but I will start at the top and see what I can do. So the first question relates to the impact of data. And it says, in your experience, can you offer an example of how local leaders have used data to strengthen communities in a tangible way? Have leaders been receptive to using the data you collect to advance racial equity in their policies, practices, and procedures? So how have leaders used data to strengthen communities and to advance equity in their policies, practices, and procedures? Anybody?
I can give you an example from our NNIP partner in Memphis that won our Impact Award this year. They have organized sort of an amazing infrastructure of property level data, and they organized this data to partner with the city government and the county government on their eviction settlement program to really make sure that those outreach and funds were targeted to where there was needed most rather than just who heard about it. So trying to get the information out. And they also provided some good evaluation of the program to justify further funding of it. So I think there's, we've been talking a lot about community and grassroots, but local governments can also participate in this, and both in the democratizing data and in using it in smart ways.
And just three quick ways. Quick. The work that we did on the ground in Clayton County, Georgia, working to inform communities about the benefits of expanding transit, working to ensure that people understood where the dollars were going. And even though it would be difficult for them, to pay that sales tax, that it would create a level of infrastructure in that community that could bring the county back. From that deep organizing and educating the community about the data implications of their vote, we were able to get over 90% of the vote and get $13 million to expand MARTA for the first time in 45 years. Also, for us too, like we worked with our watershed management department, utilizing the data and the research to actually facilitate the development of a water equity task force, who developed a water equity plan for the city of Atlanta, which included a green infrastructure bond. And we also provided a great deal of research that will inform a local hiring policy for the green infrastructure bond to ensure that folks will actually have access, local people have access to jobs as it relates to the green infrastructure bond. And then of course, last but certainly not least, I really believe, this is the second iteration of the Metro Atlanta Equity Atlas, and with our focus on racial equity. But I think that from our work, we were actually able, through the initial atlas, to win the battle of the baseline and really create a space for elected officials and community to work towards moving forward on local policies and other actions. One key case in point, which is kind of connected to that, is that I had an opportunity to work with actually our newspaper. We have a large scale development project called the Atlanta Beltline. And many years ago, we worked with one of the newspapers to do research on whether the dollars for the Beltline were actually being used to develop affordable housing. And as a result of our engagement and working with students and the newspaper, a spread, a 4-page spread, was articulated about the challenges and how the Beltline was not investing money to create affordable housing. And as a result of that, as well as me resigning from the board of the Beltline, the CEO was actually fired. And someone else was actually put in that position to begin the process of moving forward differently, as well as additional dollars were invested in affordable housing in the city. So again, it's not just about the data, right? It's about how can you really leverage the data in a courageous way, right? That will kind of create the conditions for the communities that positivity for the communities that we care about.
Wonderful.
And I'll highlight two things that we've seen happen. Academy of Hope is part of a larger coalition in the city called the Adult and Family Literacy Coalition that we were a big part of getting started. There are a couple of things that we've used just data across the city around one, the number of people who are accessing adult education services who either were never identified as having a disability when they were in school, and we're doing some, as schools, we're doing some screening, and have estimates of the number of individuals enrolled in adult schools who are potentially individuals with disabilities. That's one. And what the result of that is having that information across the sector really helped us to really advocate for citywide funding for individuals to access the kind of psychological assessments that are needed to get an accommodation on the GED. So if you're an adult and you've been out of school for 20 years, one, you can't get your IEP easily, and you can't, the cost of a full-on education battery to get an accommodation on the GED is very costly. And so the coalition coming together to really push for individuals having those kinds of assessments made it easier for people to get the psychological assessments needed to get the accommodations on the GED, which was an uphill battle.
Terrific. Those are terrific examples. This next question is about partnerships, and specifically difficult partnerships. And the question is, do you have any suggestions on how local communities can get data on and from organizations that are unwilling to communicate or cooperate with our equity efforts, such as local police departments? So getting data on or from uncooperative organizations.
Yeah, I think we have a host of different strategies that people can try, and I'll put a plug in for the grant program, the Catalyst grant program, which funds local organizations around racial equity and the reform of the criminal legal system. So many of our grantees are working on policing data. We also have a guide to data sharing, so we can do that. I think it's ranged from, I think somebody in the question and answers mentioned the FOIA and the legal pieces. Going to the media, I think, is sometimes an offer, and then also sort of collaborative work negotiating over time. I think that depends on the type of data that's possible. But our Catalyst grantee, Faith in Indiana, managed to get from their chief of police agreement that they would start collecting race on police stops after a lot of faith-based organizing and conversations with the police department and the community. So I think there's both sort of more confrontational and more collaborative ways to get data. If people need examples of other cities that are doing it, that's the other thing. Cities are competitive against one another. So if you say, well, like, here's what Philadelphia is showing, why can't we do that? That's another way that we suggest people go to the government agencies.
Nathaniel or Leicester, any additional experiences?
Well, I think, I don't think that people should be afraid to sue.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anybody say that yet, but suing is definitely, especially when you're engaged with a public institution, is a very effective way to get information. Also too, it's really about how do you develop and cultivate the narrative, and really through research report how the lack of that data is minimizing opportunities for good policy to happen and for everyday people to benefit from that data. And so, we've done a lot of work around strategic communications and really trying our best to really show how the lack of information minimizes an opportunity for policymakers to make good decisions. So some of it is about positive peer pressure, whether it be through strategic communications or through advocacy. But also, if those two don't work, I would say suing is something that people need to be prepared to do.
Okay. Unless you have something to add, Lester, I'll move on to the next question. No. Okay. So the next one is community engagement, privacy, and trust. First one is, someone said, there often seems to be a tension between granular data, like census level data, and people's right to privacy. Can you talk about best practices you see or recommend for balancing those seemingly competing interests? Granular data and privacy, protecting privacy.
Well, I'm happy to jump in there, because I think we are definitely in a place where, you know, privacy becomes an issue. Our learners can opt out of it. Is not a requirement that you provide the data that we're asking for. And that forces us to really talk to and explain why we're collecting certain data with our learners, but it is absolutely a tension. I mean, we ask for very sensitive information, and some of that goes back to Nathaniel, what you shared. It's around some of the funding sources that we have that are asking us to share that information. But for us, it is also a big part of how we look at how we're impacting communities and groups of folks, and are we helping people to move along? You know, our mission is to help people, one, to achieve the educational and economic outcomes that they've set for themselves, and are we helping to support that in a real way? And you know, sometimes just explaining to people that's how we're using that data, and that we're not pushing out individual information to government agencies or other people, that it, you know, if we are pushing out, it's in aggregate form, but making sure that they are fully aware that, you know, that their privacy is protected, but they can opt out of it. It is not a requirement that you provide that data to participate in our school.
I'll put a plug in for the much less exciting work around data governance. So really, I think organizations, any organization with data about people, really need to have step back and have some formal procedures. And there's lots of templates out there. I mean, both people procedures like passwords, but also how people can opt out, how they can destroy their data. There's a whole range of things, and there's a lot of tools out there. And there's a great toolkit from the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy that I'll put in the chat. That's there because there is a way to center racial equity in data governance as you go through and make your policies for your organization. And then the other really exciting innovation that Urban is contributing to are tools that allow people to sort of access the underlying data and still do the analysis through the technology tools and our folks working on privacy at Urban. So there's both exciting ways to be able to get the insights from the data without releasing the data, but any individual organization, and that's another way to get to help people convince people to give you confidential data, to share that with you, is to have that data governance in place. So I'll put that I'll put the toolkit in the chat for people to look at, but and we also have a resource guide for data governance that I can share too, because it's like I said, it's kind of the less sexy work about using the data, sharing the data, getting the qualitative information, interacting with community. All of that really needs a solid foundation.
Great. Nathaniel, did you get a chance to answer? I've actually lost track.
Well, I'll just be quick and say, I mean, I think that data governance is very important, you know, but also I say that the greatest difference between equity and equality is history. And I think one of the reasons why communities don't trust researchers or academic institutions, and this is coming from someone that worked in academia for a number of years, is the relationship that academia and research institutions have had with Black communities and historically disinvested communities of color. I mean, this extractive history of people of color being used to substantiate the various hypotheses or to test, a belief in superiority of certain groups, or on many occasions, anchor institutions going into communities, again, to extract information at all costs, and without even giving the community access to that data. All of that has caused harm, right? All of that has caused a lack of trust. And so the first thing that has to be done is that if people really want to go into communities and make change happen, they have to acknowledge that, right? Reconciliation, right? It has to be a key component to rebuilding that trust, to building that trust. And then, it's being able to fully communicate what is the value added that this research is bringing to the community. If it doesn't make sense, for the community, why should they be involved? And so I just think that to me, it all goes back to history. And if we can find a way to reconcile that history and be plain and clear to communities about how they're benefiting from the research that researchers are extracting from communities, then I think they would trust us more. And then also too, I mean, I do think that it also is dependent upon where's the data centralized, right? Who actually has the data, right? I mean, and the closer that institution is to the ground, the more trust the community will have that potentially, especially if they have good relationships with the community, that data will be stewarded in the right way. So, those are just three key things that I've seen that have kind of benefited and helped to facilitate trust in community. So,
and your response perfectly matched with the next question I was going to ask, which was about communicating with communities that might be skeptical and steps you can take to ensure that the data are not harmful. So do you have maybe some steps to share, Leicester or Kathy, in that regard?
Yeah, I think it is harm. I mean, ensuring that the data is not harm. It is, I think about it in the way that we speak about the people who access our services, right? I'll be honest with you, some of the things that I heard in that video, which is an older video, I just want to make me cringe, because really our learners are much more than their deficits, right? The lack of, and then that's old language and the way that we speak to the skills and strengths of people who are accessing our services. So that I think that is harm, when we take that data and we talk about 50% of our learners lack, or that there is a hole, or they're not whole people and are not there. So I think making sure that that data is used, one, for us, is how do we improve the work that we're doing. But when we speak about individuals who access our services, that we are not coming from a lack or deficit position in describing who we have. And a lot of times the data that you're collecting, particularly I know in education settings, or we start there. And that is not where you want to start. And that causes a lot more harm than good.
I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate you making that point.
That was.
I was just thinking that
the last word.
Oh, okay.
No, you're the last word.
Oh, I am the last word.
Yes.
I think that just a flag that, we used to show racial disparities in benefits and outcomes and wealth and think that told its own story. And people often took the wrong story from that about individual behavior and not structural causes and not the systems that created those outcomes. So just showing being more courageous about shaping the narrative and the story that you want to tell, and including the history and policies that surround whatever that outcome was, is a way to protect protect your message, right? And help to make sure that people are not interpreting the data you're sharing in a harmful way.
Great. So I want to thank the three of you so much for participating, for your presentations, and for being in this roundtable, and to thank the audience again for joining us. And I want to remind everybody that we will be sending out all the links that have been put in the chat and that have been mentioned, so that you'll have access to additional information about all the projects that you've heard about today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Faith. This was fun.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.